Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lauren McGee, and I am the Content and Education Manager here at CLOC. And we are really thrilled to bring you today's CLOC Ask the Experts. Is ChatGPT or machine learning the right tool for analyzing your contracts? And that is presented by Knowable. Before we get started, I just want to point out a couple of features to help you get the most out of today's webinar. So at the bottom of your screen on the platform, you'll see that you have a chat box. This is for you to chat with each other, let us know what you're thinking, be able to kind of add your comments. And then we also have a Q&A box. You had the opportunities to submit questions during registration. We're going to get to many of those questions today, but if you have any questions that come up during the webinar, go ahead and put them in the chat box, in the Q&A box, and we will try and get to as many of those as we can. Finally, we also have a session evaluation, super quick, just 3 questions that will come up at the end of the webinar. If you could just take a quick moment, give us your feedback, that'll help us as we plan these future webinars for you. We are also recording today's session, so you'll be able to rewatch the session if you miss any of it or want to go back and revisit. You'll get the link to the webinar within a couple of days after this. And so with that, I just want to welcome you all again. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to thank our sponsor, Knowable, for putting together this great session with this really great panel. And I'm going to hand it over to our panelists so that we can get started.
All right. Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you, CLOC, for letting us do this. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We're super excited to have so many of you here. It's really a fantastic turnout. And it's great that you did come because it's going to be a really good conversation. Every time I speak with these two, I learn a lot. And so I'm sure you're going to learn a bunch as well. The topic today is something that's been on all of our minds. What does crypto, autonomous driving cars, and ChatGPT have in common? And if you guessed contracts, you got it. But that's what we're going to talk about today. It's one of those interesting times right now. It feels like every single day, a new solution using some new kind of AI is announced, and it's promising to help you with your contract chaos. And we'd all love to believe it's really just that easy. And today we're going to talk about that. By way of background, quickly, we'll do some introductions, and then we'll get into the meat of the conversation. My name is Nick Reed. I run product, R&D, kind of data science, UX, everything basically that's product and technology at Knowable. Knowable is the executed agreements company. What that means is we help large enterprise find their contracts and know what's in them, to put it simply. I also co-founded a company called Ravel out of Stanford Law School about 15 years ago. I mentioned that because it was one of the first 100% pure machine learning legal tech companies. And part of the reason I'm here today is from that learning, I learned a whole lot about what ML can do and its promises, which are amazing, but also when you need humans in the loop or additional review if you care about accuracy or the subject matter is really, really complicated. These two gentlemen that are here with us tonight have also spent a lot of time thinking about this in their various roles. And so I'm going to pass it to them to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump in. But maybe, Akshay, could you let the crowd know who you are?
Sure. Akshay Verma. I am currently the head of legal operations at Coinbase. My journey in the legal world starts almost 23 years ago. I was a lawyer for a long time in the environmental field, but since 2012 have been on the business side of the law through my time at Axiom, and then the last couple of roles at Meta and now at Coinbase. And particularly kind of, I'll call it my own CLM journey. Started during my time at Axiom when a lot of this stuff didn't really involve any technology, and it was just humans and spreadsheets and paper and maybe PDFs. So really kind of excited to see where we are now and kind of where we take it in the future.
So thanks, Akshay. Rob.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Rob Kwant. I lead legal operations for Cruise. We're an autonomous vehicle company based in San Francisco. Over my shoulder is our newest product that is currently launched in Austin, actually, and hopefully coming to a city near you soon. I'm formerly an attorney. I started my career as a litigator, similar to Akshay. Worked formerly as an attorney for a while, then went in-house. I've mostly been at startups, and again, like Akshay, I've been involved with CLM from like a very basic level, from the ground up, when we were using checklists and an internal wikis, to where we are now at Cruise, where we have a company of approximately 4,000 people and kind of managing a CLM systems architecture. So it's great to be here.
Cool. Awesome. So before we talk about solutions, I thought maybe something we could do is talk about, given both of your kind of vast experience and what you've done, what is it when we talk about contracts and, from a legal ops perspective, or even just, as a lawyer yourselves in practice, what is it that you and your business like feel like you need to know or query out of contracts? Rob, maybe starting with you, like what are some of the questions that you hear people asking that you feel like challenged as the head of legal ops that you need to be able to answer?
Well, I think firstly, it's important to just kind of understand what kind of legal department you are and what kind of the main needs of your internal clients are. So, for example, for Cruise is a very dynamic company. We're a tech first company, so we're very forward on all the tech solutions that we use with our product, but also internally for our operations. That's amazing on one hand, but on the other hand, it makes things a little chaotic at Cruise. And so for us, for CLM, a lot of our focus is just basically on change management, understanding what our stakeholders are doing, and making sure that the sequencing of all the tasks in our contract workflow are aligned and everybody is doing everything in a coordinated manner. Even now, even though we've gotten pretty sophisticated, we're still very focused on just change management around making sure all our contracts are in one place. And then also just understanding, very basic information for what are in our contracts, right? Very basic information like the effective date, the term, renewal terms, when they expire, making sure all our stakeholders know those things. And so like for CLM, we get very frequent and basic questions about that on an ongoing basis. Everybody wants to talk about the kind of like these very interesting, like aggregated data analysis AI use cases where you comb through millions of contracts and find these amazing insights. For us, it's the day-to-day, managing the change, understanding, the fundamentals, and making sure that we keep those fundamentals as our organization scales from, a small company to one that has a national focus.
Cool. And Akshay, maybe kind of similar question to you, and maybe just also kind of like thinking about, are you having similar problem kind of getting all your contracts in one place, answering what seems like basic questions, but that may be hard, and maybe like why is that hard if they're like these really
Yeah, like sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but I think it's Rob's point is such a good one. Like this is a basic problem for everybody. Like, literally simple stuff like where are these contracts, or do we have agreements with, or what do agreements with X party say? Like really basic contract questions that should be like heavy, like bold, underline, all caps, should be at the fingertips of whoever in the department is responsible for answering, whether it's contract managers or the lawyers, legal ops. It doesn't matter who that person is in any given department, but whoever that person is should be able to answer them very, very quickly and easily. I have almost never seen that to be the case in my experience. And to me, that is such a foundational problem to start with when you start thinking about, well, can you use machine learning or ChatGPT? Fine, we can get there. But before you get there, like, can we just answer these basic questions and get there? So that's, we still struggle with that. We struggled with it at Meta. We struggled with it at Coinbase. And I think I'm finally in a place where we're on a journey to solve that. I'll take it to the other end of the spectrum a little bit, Nick, which is that in an ideal situation, and especially for a company like us, we're highly regulated. You might read about us in the news with some of the regulators. There are questions that are asked on a very regular basis around regulatory provisions that are in our agreements. And whether that's the product of an investigation or just kind of internal product development, whatever the question may be, the thought and the hope is that you're able to answer those without engaging in a 7-week odyssey to comb through a bunch of contracts, find them, review them, send them to outside counsel, get an analysis back. Like, hopefully we're at a place, I think we are, where technology can solve a lot of that for you. It won't be the say all end all, but that it can do a lot of that for you now.
So let's go back to kind of these basic things that both of you have spoken about, like effective date, finding a contract with a counterparty. Why hasn't technology solved it? Like, why is this not a solved problem today?
I think that's a simple question with a complicated answer. I think that like when you look at like a contracting workflow, it just has so many different elements, so many coordinated stakeholders are contributing to it, and you're collecting information from a lot of different places, right? And so you're collecting information from humans that are outside of the four corners of the agreement, but then also you need to understand what's actually in the agreement itself, but then the terms of the agreement modify over time. And so you just have a lot of different types of data that you need to collect, and a lot of inputs that provide that data. And right now, I think most of us are still in a world where we're manually collecting that data. And even if you had the most sophisticated AI solution, it probably wouldn't be able to help you collect even a large portion of that data, right? And so I'm going on the same journey as Akshay. In fact, Akshay, when you complete your journey, let me know, because I would actually like to learn from you, because we've been focused on trying to find AI solutions for just kind of discrete basic use cases, which is just like taking very basic information out of an agreement and kind of accelerating what we call like a manual finalization review process, where a human actually has to go in after an agreement is signed and just like check to make sure that like certain foundational pieces of information are there. And we still unfortunately have that as the end of our CLM process. And to be honest with you, we have a backlog of thousands of agreements right now. We're not keeping up with that. So it's not as exciting as like applying large language models to extracting these insights from a lot of agreements, but that's where we are, and that's what we need to solve for right now.
Akshay, any other thoughts?
Yeah, if you look at kind of where I think the focus of companies has been, it's been around getting contracts signed, which is a very different exercise, focus, endeavor than what's in my contracts. And I think the whether you want to call it the buy side of the equation or whatever side of the equation you want to call it, I think they really missed the boat on the crown jewels of what's in their contracts already. And I think and the market drives a lot of what's actually developed and where providers go. So if you look at the CLM space, let's just look at the market on the sell side that's out there, you'll see a huge component of it, a huge slice of the pie that is focused on getting you to signature. And there, and by the way, I say this without judgment, there's a reality there, which is around revenue. And when you close deals faster, you're recognizing revenue. And the same thing on the efficiency works on the buy side of the equation with procurement. But that's where I think the vast majority of the focus has been until more recently. So you probably, you had a lot of development and effort with respect to technology and services to get you to signature over a longer period of time. Now you're starting to see more of an effort and an understanding and really a realization of the value on your post-executed agreements, which also gives us hope that, once we get to a better place with that technology or that combination of technology and service, that you're able to get the answers to the questions that we just briefly discussed in the first part of this conversation.
Yeah, it was funny. I was often I'll get a ping from either like a VC that's doing diligence on a company, or maybe it's like a friend from law school who just met someone and they've just met somebody that's like, ooh, I've got this really great idea. I'm going to build a company that's going to take contracts and turn them into data. And it's kind of like every couple of months, and underlying it, I think, is a lot of times when we have our first experience with a contract, whether you're starting a startup, you're renting your first apartment, or you're just like signing up for something for the first time, and you're a CS student in school. It seems like it's this really structured. You get this document. There's like bold headers. There's kind of like insert the blank for your term and the fees, and so it feels like it should be this really easy thing. It's like this structured document that just like, it's a fill in, it's kind of like Mad Libs for lawyers or something. And why can't we create AI that just solves that? So kind of moving to like thinking about how we could make the process better and AI to work on this. So what are you guys thinking about today? So given that this, you've been thinking about this for a while, you think it's a valuable problem to solve. What are the kinds of solutions that you're considering, and like how far does it take you on your journey? Like how much of it is just solving it for you versus helping you on the way?
Well, so I'll say I've actually been pretty frustrated trying to find like AI solutions to the problems that we're having, because I've been very specific about what we want to solve for, right? It's really like specifically, we have a backlog of agreements that a human needs to check to ensure they have fundamental, the metadata that we care about is just tagged 100% correctly, right? And when I go to a number of AI vendors in the space, it's obvious that they're not focused on that discrete use set, which is us, over a day or two, just incrementally sending 10, 20 contracts to go through this review process, and having AI either do it for us or do AI aided review of just flagging these terms for us, to really accelerate what our humans are doing. And so we've talked to a number of companies, and after initial conversations, it's obvious that they're not really focused on that. What they want us to do is send them like 100,000 agreements, and they want to wow us with all the data they can extract from this big repository of agreements we see them. They're going to visualize our data and all these things. But for us, that isn't that useful. We want to make sure that like the minimal amount of data is 100% correct, and that we're storing it correctly and we're able to act on it. And it's been a long journey actually trying to provide or find providers that can actually just focus on that for us.
Yeah. No, I think it's an important note, and that kind of leads to the, this kind of topic of trade-off between accuracy. In machine learning, they often talk about kind of just, there always are trade-offs, like, how many of the documents are returned that actually meet your query versus how right are those answers. And it doesn't, it doesn't seem like a natural trade-off. You're kind of like, well, I want both. Like, can I get really accurate data, and can you do it on all my documents? Like, why do I have to give up one for the other? But it is this kind of reality of machine learning. What, Akshay, and your, and I think there's just also, I would put out there, there's probably different kinds of times where different levels of accuracy may matter. So I remember talking to the head of corporate strategy at this really big company once, and he used to be the head of corporate strategy at eBay when they bought DoubleClick, and it was $1 billion deal, and they decided to do it over a weekend. Like, there was no diligence that was going to be done in a weekend on $1 billion deal where, attorneys could feel like they reviewed every contract. And so I imagine you're already taking a lot of risk, and there's probably situations like that where risk is more acceptable. Akshay, maybe talk a little bit, especially you said you're in a highly regulated industry, kind of what is your risk tolerance with kind of contracts data, and where would you draw the line?
Yeah. Look, our reality, not just in terms of the risk profile, but I'd say a benefit profile as well. For us, there was actually quite a bit of benefit in going to the high end of the accuracy level, whatever it is, in the high 90s. In partly because we couldn't afford to get some of the regulatory stuff wrong. There's certainly that I'll call it reactive risk, but we're aiming a lot of this technology at the sell side of the equation for us in our institutional agreements. So there's a lot of business opportunity there that we want to capture, whether it's negotiation, having pricing terms, things that are really, really complicated, that warrants the level of accuracy that we're after, because there's a big benefit on the other side of it. Yeah, I could also see other companies who aren't quite in the same position be totally fine leveraging just AI. For us, it has to be AI plus a QC layer with humans, because we need that accuracy level. Whereas, I think eventually AI will get there. I don't know how long. Like, I'm not a software coder or developer by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm sure that the machine learning AI capabilities will get to a higher accuracy level at some point down the line. It's not there yet. So for us, it was really a component of both things, the risk profile associated with getting it wrong, but also the benefit that's there on the business side with the opportunity that's in front of us.
What so I mean, obviously coming from Knowable, the executed agreements company, I care a lot about what's in your executed contracts, but let's talk a little bit about before execution, pre-execution. It sounds like both of you have looked at kind of employing AI in getting to signed. What does that look like? Are you guys doing, is it kind of suggest a clause or language in a contract? What kind of tools are you excited about? Or solution?
Yeah, I mean, for me, foundationally, it's similar to what I talked about, right? You have an agreement on template sometime, or a lot of the times you send it to a counterparty edits it and sends it back, right? Ideally, a lawyer is not the first reviewer of that agreement when it comes back. It's someone in procurement, at least for us it is, because we're mostly buy side. And so what you want AI to do is flag the terms that have changed for that individual and let them know like the extent to which they conflict with our playbooks, right? And we've seen those features. Those features exist. We're excited about them. We have a different focus right now, but that's something that we're planning to source in the next year or so here. But that's something in particular we're excited about.
Yeah, I think just to add on to Rob's point, anything that can help accelerate the process is going to be beneficial, whether you're doing buy contracts or sell contracts, particularly sell contracts, because there's revenue implications. So clause libraries that are tied into some level of generative AI. I know only a little bit about what that actually means, but it sounds good. But essentially, it's can the thing draft the contract for you in the way that you needed drafted, number one, and number two, to Rob's point, if you're using somebody else's paper, like what's changed and what should I be using? So taking a lot of the manual process out of the actual redlining negotiation tactics, I think is a really beneficial use on the workflow side of things. I segmented into pre-sig, which I call workflow, and then post-sig, which is around analytics.
Yeah, I mean, anytime we could get our attorneys out of things, even if it's like fractionally, like 5% out of things, then it's worth it for us as a company that's quickly growing. We're mindful that we need tools like AI to scale our legal department's capabilities because we can't grow proportionally with how we want to grow our product. And so we're actually pretty dependent on solutions like AI, and we have to find these areas where we can really increase efficiency because we don't have an option of adding more staff or like spending more proportionally. So
I think that last point should really be underscored as well. And that's a reality in any industry right now. There's this whole adage in ops, right? Like you have to do more with less, which whatever you want to believe about that, whether it's true or not, the reality of it is often you have to do more work. Whether you get more to do it or not, that's up to your individual company. But I think it's a critical piece to be able to scale individuals and then groups. And none of this is revolutionary. Like this is not a revolutionary concept. The tools that we are now employing or may employ in the near future are what's newer. And that's really the extent of it.
yeah, and so we're under a lot of pressure, particularly from our GC, right, to implement these solutions because they're making a lot of news. But again, I go back to my frustration is when you focus on very discrete use cases and are very precise about what you actually need, it's actually pretty hard to find like an AI vendor that's going to meet exactly what you need, particularly for the accuracy that you're looking for. And at least in the near term, you're always going to have a human in the loop, right? So it's wrong to think that AI is going to take a human out of like these CLM workflows completely. It's always going to be a human is still going to be there, but over time they're going to get more and more efficient.
Well, I like what both of you are saying a lot, and it's it kind of harkens to there a lot of people you know, maybe it's the GC or it's like the CFO, right? Or there's kind of this there's these two paths. Like, are we employing these tools to make our people more efficient because we're just already not keeping up with the work, or do we only get these tools if we're like, you know, laying off 5 people as an exchange to get to do the expense in technology? And it sounds like both of you guys are really seeing this as kind of an additive thing that's going to allow your teams to do more. How is that seen in your company? Like, what is the conversation when you guys are like, hey, I want to buy this new piece of technology, and do you have someone that's like, oh, cool, how many people are we letting go of in 6 months in exchange for that? Hopefully not.
I mean, I'll just say that, like, our company, in terms of our product, which is like deploying like driverless rideshare, AI has made it possible, right? You know, we could not do what we're doing and have the safety metrics that we have right now without completely going all in on AI. And so, like, I've been taking cruise AVs since 2018. And that was around the time they started really like leveraging AI, and just the improvement has just been amazing. And it's just like astounded me, particularly recently over the last year or so. And so it's just been amazing to see the improvements there with how our cars encounter, like, you know, the millions of situations that they encounter driving on public roads. I am impatient though. I want to get these solutions and apply them to our work. And I'm really frustrated that I haven't been able to like implement kind of the same improvement for our legal work. And as you can tell, it's just been kind of a frustrating journey.
Rob, I'm still on the wait list. So I signed up for Cruise a long time ago, and I can't wait. What, Akshay, and you've kind of seen this, I think, you know, in different companies, right? You've been kind of at companies that are growing fast, like where you are now. You were at a company that grows fast at times, also deals with big swings in the market at times. And, you know, I know you're not at Meta this year, but we hear this year is all about efficiency.
Yeah.
How do you feel like that conversation happens?
Well, our reality was a little bit different. It's kind of the converse of your example, which is, you know, I've been at Coinbase since April of last year. We've gone through 2 rifts. But the work has not slowed down. In fact, it's accelerated. So for us across the company, but I'll speak to kind of my own world within ops, it's been an opportunity, almost a necessity, to try and figure out and innovate in these areas. So yeah, in fact, we just I don't remember if it was late last week or yesterday, one of the contract managers on a team reached out to my team and said, hey, when's this going to be full board up and running? I'm getting absolutely buried in these requests, and it's still very manual. And to me, we're trying to solve for that guy, right? And there are a multitude of people like that at our organization that will benefit from this solution. And evidently, and eventually the business is going to benefit from that solution. So a lot of the focus is around, you know, making sure that we're creating the scale for those people to be able to have those answers at their fingertips, rather than the excruciatingly painful manual process that it is right now.
Yeah, I saw something the other day that was it was like 1950s showing the drafting room for this architecture firm. And it was like the number of people, the size of the tables, and all the different like rulers and pencils that were involved in just like making what would be a really basic architectural diagram today. You know, staggering. Like we had, it was kind of like you were saying, actually, like, you know, in the 90s on CLM, it's like armies of people doing these tasks that now, you know, we have applications and software that make really easy. There's a notion, it's called the rebound effect, and it's kind of interesting. I think it really resonates to me with kind of how lawyers and technology work, but it's kind of like the more we get of something, the more we actually want as humans. And so the example is kind of like a light bulb, you know, like at first with Edison, it was like JP Morgan thought like one light bulb in his room was going to be the most amazing thing. That's all he'd ever need. And now we can't count the number of light bulbs we have in every room in all of our homes, and we want more and more light bulbs, and we want them to last longer. It's not good enough if we have to change them often. And that's kind of like, for me, lawyers are very much that way. It's like we get to a pretty cool moment in innovation, and yet like our ability to kind of want more and see the next thing, because we're inherently living with all this risk. And I think this is a good segue to GPT, because one of the things that my kind of journey has really been in and around is kind of law as a language, and how hard complex language is for computers often. And like if you think of most language as being relatively difficult, as lawyers, we kind of take the cake for making it as hard as possible, and we live on the art of nuance and the way things relate to each other, right? So a paragraph at the beginning may get modified by a paragraph in addenda number 5 or amendment number 15, and it's really like having those connections in your mind that matter as lawyers. So thinking about that complexity and the exciting times we live in with GPT, and I'll say large language models writ whole, because I think GPT is the biggest large language model right now, but there are a whole bunch of them out there that all have their various use cases. What are you guys excited about the role that large language models are going to have for kind of your practice? Is it intimidating? Like where, because we've kind of been talking a little bit more about AI broadly. If we focused on, the latest, how are you guys feeling about it?
Bipolar. The application to a lot of the things that we do in the Cruise legal department is like very exciting. I'll give you one example. So we Cruise-wide recently implemented a AI-based search and chat tool called Glean. And it's only a few weeks old, or probably a month old. But we've been experimenting with a lot, and one of the things in my portfolio in legal operations is, or newly has been, knowledge management. How legal understands like the information that we create and are able to leverage it efficiently. And just over the last month, like trying to spin up this initiative, create it for the legal department, and then Glean coming online, I'm realizing that I have to do a lot less work. And all we have to do is focus on a few best practices instead of like focusing on 10 best practices to really surface information for our legal department and really just allow lawyers and other legal staff to understand that it exists and leverage it. Now that's like a Cruise-wide instance, and I'm like very excited about that particular application. But when you think about large language models, they're only as good as their data source, right? And if it's using a data source that is generated by humans are inherently flawed, right? And so AI very potentially could just magnify those human flaws if you're not careful. And then the other thing that I'm mindful of is the fact that with large language models, it's a black box. So when you put an input into it, you have no way of knowing exactly what the output is going to be. And so one of the things we're going to start digging into, particularly when we find more applications within our legal department, is like, what is the release process for these AI vendors? How can they assure us when they change their software or we put new inputs into their systems that the results that they say are going to come out are accurate and consistent? There's an analogy to our Cruise AVs is like, we've invested a lot in AI, but also commensurately, we've invested in an incredibly rigorous release process where we have simulation, we have closed course testing, we have driver testing, and only after it goes through a rigorous release process do we release software to our AVs, because we want to understand exactly how it performs on the roads. And I'm not necessarily seeing that with like other AI providers that are telling us they can do legal work for us or help our legal work. So I feel a need to really dig into that, particularly if we're going to require accuracy. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds way more rigorous than anything Uber is doing with their drivers. So feeling safer.
No comment. No comment.
I didn't know this was going to be a Cruise versus Uber battle here as well.
But I think it's a really interesting point you brought. So I was just at this conference last week. It was an AI and law conference, and there were professors, people from industry, judges even, and a lot of academics. And they were talking about what you just kind of, well, they're talking about a lot of things you just spoke about, Rob, but there's the biases in these models that we really have to take into account. There was the fact that the black box side, like we don't understand why they do what they do still. And that's exciting, but intimidating. But we really don't know yet. And then kind of the fact that like you don't really get the same answer twice in a row, even to the same question. And so actually I kind of, maybe I'll throw like that challenge to you, like what is the use case for something like that? If you know, as an attorney, you kind of want, I mean, we like to believe that there is a right answer. And certainly in something like contracting, often there is definitely a closer to best answer.
Yeah, like I think in part it starts to a point you made about lawyers earlier, Nick, which is that, and we're all three of us are lawyers, so I can say this. We hold on to this concept that we are uniquely suited for every little thing that we do, and there's almost like a martyrdom with respect to effort. And I think that holds us back from really considering these kinds of solutions wholeheartedly. But from my perspective, like I'm the son of an engineer, like been in Silicon Valley most of my life. Like I'm an early adopter. So my answer to this question is like, yeah, we absolutely should be looking at this. Does this mean that there's not a lot to figure out? No, absolutely. There's a lot to figure out. Are there going to be pitfalls along the way? Absolutely. Are we going to get things wrong? Yeah, for sure. Right. Just look at what's happened with SpaceX and like what they have made possible that NASA couldn't do for decades. So these are problems that we can solve. I don't think it's a reason to shy away from them from a philosophical perspective. Definitely some danger, some regulations, some standardization that needs to be instituted into the whole thing. But I think it has such a powerful application and impact. Let's just focus on the in-house department for all departments to scale significantly in what they do. I think the role of the lawyer will probably fundamentally change in how they think about their work and how they go about doing their work. But I think there's always going to be an aspect of trust but verify. And it's certainly there now. You have to do it now. But that was no less true when Westlaw and LexisNexis first put all of their cases and statutes up onto this portal that I haven't seen in like 10 years because I don't miss that part of it at all. But there was always this apprehension. Is this right? Is this the real thing? Is this the actual language of the code? Are these the actual annotations? I don't know. Over time, you came to trust them because your own data and experience with the outcome told you that you could. To me, that's going to be, I think, is going to be the outcome with ChatGPT or whatever other language model that you use. To Rob's point, I think what you train that model with, that data, is critical. Whether it's a closed ecosystem, and for us, it will be a closed ecosystem for a variety of different reasons, or if it's an open ecosystem, probably more dangers in the open ecosystem just because there's more land out there for them to, get all kinds of gunk into. But that's no different from a Google search. So you have to verify your Google search to some extent. So again, I think these concepts are not new to us. Google's been around forever. I think how we're applying them, I think there is probably a tendency to over rely on the outcome. And I think we have to walk back from that a little bit and just make sure that we're doing it the appropriate way. But I think the applicability and the future of it in in-house departments can be incredibly powerful.
And I think it's a bit counterintuitive, but I think we'll find in the future that like less is more for the data that kind of AI leverages to a certain extent, right? Because to minimize biases or kind of human frailty or it's just something that is just really hard to keep out of large data sets, right? You just have to be very mindful of where the data comes and how you train the AI because that could really influence accuracy in the results. And in that sense, AI is actually pretty human. It involves a lot of human inputs to make sure that it's accurate.
So there's a question from the group that kind of that is nice to tack on to our current conversation, which is that there seems to be a debate about the relevancy of kind of labeling and having taxonomies versus like trusting an LLM that's kind of read the internet and ostensibly has these concepts already in their mind. How do you guys think about kind of that trade-off where, you know, and I would say traditional machine learning, I would call it at this point, was heavily reliant on taxonomies and really kind of thoughtfully early crafted structured data. And it does feel like the new models, we're supposed to kind of trust that they've learned that from mass amounts of information. You're shaking your head, Rob.
Again, mass amounts of information are flawed, right? Because if you're pulling in flawed information that is generated from humans or other sources, you know, you'll never know exactly what is going to come out of the input you put into the system, right? And so I think you have to like combine heuristics, which is like a rule-based system, to really constrain what you're actually getting out of like the LLM model, right? And so I think in the future you'll see people tagging AI, right? Going in and looking at AI results and kind of interacting with the system to put structure in terms of and train it more on like what results are actually acceptable. And in fact, I think a few AI companies are actually doing that. But it's a mix of both, right? I do think that it's very dangerous to just rely on unstructured LLM results. Like that is something that you have to think about very deeply, and you have to understand where the data comes from, how it's trained. It's just important to have that understanding.
Like if you were to go to 10 lawyers with an indemnity provision and ask them some question around the indemnification around that, you would get 10 different answers. You would get 10 different answers.
And AI would give you a different version if you prompted it to give you an indemnity clause, right? So
maybe,
yeah.
But the fact is, like, what Rob suggested is what like we used to call at Axiom a gauge test with a client. And I think you have to train your models to do the exact same thing. What do we understand this to be? What is it? What's the outcome? I actually think it's going to be a different answer in different respects to some extent, which is why like, the question of an open ecosystem to train your data versus a closed ecosystem, I think that's an important one to consider. But the fact remains, like, we're talking about legalese. We're talking about natural language. We're not talking about 1 + 1 = 2, but we're trying to take that natural language and turn it into a 1 + 1 = 2. And that's a hard thing to do even for human beings. So it's only going to be as good as the way that we train it. And the hope is that we can train it in the same fashion that a lot of these providers do gauge tests to align on what contractual meaning is.
Now, I was listening to a podcast with Stephen Wolfram, you know, the founder of Wolfram, and AI, and just like, you know, maybe arguably one of the smartest guys on the planet. He definitely thinks he is. But he was talking about how GPT works in large language models, and you know, they're predicting the best word or maybe even letter to come after the context of what they've been given beforehand. So it's kind of like, you know, the cat sat on the blank, and it's gonna have read everything that it's read before, and it's going to say, oh, you know, this is the most likely word that's going to come up based on kind of human lexicon. And it's interesting when you think about the law, because I'm sure there's implicitly that's part of the way we think, but it's also like it's explicitly, it's exactly what we try not to do when we're writing well. We're like often thinking on how to craft something, and kind of, even if it's a contract, but in an artful way that's not always the most obvious, either for gamesmanship reasons or because that's the way we look at it. And so I think it is fascinating to think of like, what are these large language models really going to be doing with law if they're not specifically trained on legal language? And they've really had a lot of, you know, I think what you were talking about, Rob, too, the reinforcement feedback, like, are we having armies of attorneys doing the reinforcement feedback for the legally trained AI? Because you probably need that.
I think that's probably happening, isn't it? I think that I've seen that with a number of vendors. So at least I hope that's happening.
Yeah, I can say from we still, you know, LexisNexis bought my company, and my current company, they're investors in, and I do know they've got armies, and when I mean armies, like hundreds and hundreds of attorneys at work right now, doing that part of the process, and specifically targeted on, and kind of like you said, Akshay, like their data store, which is all legal data. I mean, we're doing the same thing at Knowable, really just focused on contracts, but I think it's early days still. there's the hallucinations, there's just like all this really interesting stuff that we're learning about. When at this conference I was at last week, one of the leading researchers at MIT was kind of pointing out, like, the reason we think they hallucinate and we don't know the answer yet is, and Rob, you were hearkening to this, like, they want to make you happy. Like, their goal is for you to give a thumbs up at some
Well,
point. Answer.
That's the thing, is you have to be careful how you train it, right? Because humans are fallible, right? And if we're training AI to kind of magnify our biases and kind of our ids, then it's going to get worse. And so that's kind of like a major flaw that people need to be aware of.
Yeah. So kind of taking a step toward a little bit of the more esoteric but super important, what are the ethical implications to you guys as kind of legal leaders in your companies, hypothetically employing technology that, we don't know 100% how it works, but it has these exciting aspects to it? What are the things that come to mind, and kind of how do you take that side into the buying equation or the deployment equation, or kind of how you guys are thinking about these, pretty serious choices in front of you?
I think, and this is pretty basic, you have an ethical obligation to understand what AI actually is and what variation of it you're getting, and you need to be precise about how you're applying it, right? Because AI is such a kind of a broad term, it actually means nothing. You have to understand exactly what type of AI you're using and what you're applying it to. Within the legal department, I have, so long as we meet those requirements, I have no kind of hesitation to be smart about applying AI tools, because like I said, we have too much work. Us applying AI isn't going to, eliminate legal workforce. It's going to make us more efficient and kind of help us do the things that we actually want to do, instead of the things that, we don't think we should be doing right now. So within our legal department, ethically, I think maybe I'm thinking about it too simply, but it's not that complicated. Outside of our legal department, LLM applied to society is a completely different issue, and I'm not going to go into that right now. But I think all three of us have concerns, because the same analysis that I just mentioned, it doesn't seem like folks are going through those basic thoughts in terms of like releasing AI to the public or influencing the public with AI. So, yeah.
Look, as far as ethics goes, I think Rob makes a really good distinction. There's kind of the legal, ethical obligations of a lawyer, and then there's the philosophical, moral, ethical obligations to society, which I would say are not part of this conversation for the time being, although I think it's a fascinating conversation. But if I'm a lawyer, I have an ethical obligation when I give legal advice for that advice to reach a certain standard. And there are times that I rely upon information, whether that's legal analysis, factual information, whatever it may be. I have an ethical obligation to some extent and reasonably verify it. So I would think of any tool that I use to give legal advice as a tool and a tool alone that I need to have some judgment around. So I think that the concept, and by the way, I don't know how much this is happening. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But to blindly rely upon anything that I use to give legal advice is probably not going to serve my ethical obligation. So I would think about it from that perspective in the practice of law, as a lawyer in a legal department.
Well, so taking it back to contracts, how do you do that verification? Akshay, like if you're evaluating an AI-based tool and it's ostensibly doing something for you on a contract, like what is your process to ensure that this kind of stands up to your definition of your legal obligations?
Yeah. With respect to leveraging technology to answer questions, there are two things that I really worry about, and one I worry about more than the other. One is a false positive, which probably not too bad because you can verify it pretty easily with your eyes and your legal brain. It's the false negative that worries me more. right? Like this does not exist, or it doesn't exist in this form, or whatever. It doesn't show up in your results, but it's actually there. That can be catastrophic, like not to be like Chicken Little or anything, but that could be catastrophic in certain instances. That's the one that worries me. I don't have a solution for that, Nick. Maybe you do, but outside of combing through everything that I have in front of me or that's possible, like I don't know what else the solution might be. But I think some layer of human activity to verify that is an absolute necessity.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that false positives are also a risk. I have a colleague that asked ChatGPT to do a regulatory analysis for like AV regulations in a number of states, and it gave a pretty thorough answer, but a number of the statutes that it listed were incorrect, right? And so that attorney had to go through, check each one of those statutes, make sure that they were accurate, and if they would have relied on it, it would have caused a lot of issues. So again, it's only as good as the data that it has and the amount of training that goes into that model.
I think that you raised a memory. I was a first-year associate at Pillsbury, and AB 32, which is the climate change law here in California, had just been passed. Arnold Schwarzenegger was our governor. And I was asked to do a little bit of a regulatory analysis on some provisions. And it was 2006. I went to Google and I printed out a number of the regulatory provisions and I did my analysis and I brought it to the partner and he looked at it and he said, "You got to go to the books. I don't know if these are real or not." Okay. I don't know that we would have that same conversation in 2023. But it's exactly the kind of thing that Rob's talking about, which is like, how do you know? It's a Google search. You have no way to really verify whether that's the actual statutory language. Whereas
the danger with AI,
the
danger with AI is someone relies on its results just like you did for Google, right? Because they actually think that it's something that it's actually not. So
then they go to court and they present a brief and they
no, I think there was an attorney that got cited. I don't remember the headline, but I think he wrote a complaint with AI and didn't check it and just submitted it. I forgot what type of pleading it was, but there was someone that recently got cited by their local bar.
AI cited cases that exist in Westlaw and Lexis that don't exist in Westlaw and Lexis.
Yeah.
Other scary thing to me is that one of the things about these LLMs, right, is that they're so confident. Like they give you answers with extreme confidence. And I think that is, with Google, a search, you never felt like it was kind of imposing confidence. We're kind of like, we grew up with it, probably not everyone on this call, but like we grew up with the evolving kind of nature of search. And you went from Ask Jeeves to Yahoo to Google, and like search quality was getting better. But like you still accepted that there was going to be, some error, wasn't always going to be right. With LLMs, like you really feel like this thing is telling you, like, I know what I'm talking about, and this is the answer, which I think poses a new level of difficulty for us in some ways. And so we've really got to be like cynics and skeptics, which I don't know that is natural given how well that, it's like when something's talking to you in such like a nice way, it kind of like you want.
Yeah. So if you need something to be precise and accurate, there are issues. I would say, at least from what I've seen from our internal tool within Cruise, like Glean, it's amazing. It goes through like a number of repositories of information, combines them, and kind of provides you the results that you need, whether it's from search or chat. And so, and it's in the early days, and so it seems pretty groundbreaking. But you still have to go through its results, and of those results, choose what you want. But initially it's pretty impressive.
Cool. Akshay, we have about 5 minutes left. So we've got a couple questions. We did have a comment about hallucinations and kind of, I think we talked about that, the scariness of potentially having a hallucination. But I would agree, and I think we should end on a note of optimism, which is I do, despite I think both of your concerns, I hear a lot of optimism. It sounds like for people on this call that are potentially at your own startup or technology vendor, sounds like these are great guys to talk to if you think you have a really good solution. Sounds like they'll at least give it a chance. And you know, we're in a new world. It's happening quickly. It's exciting. I think I shared with you guys, I had GPT write this French letter for me. I grew up in a French school, and I live in France sometimes, and I needed to pick up a package, and I needed a lettre d'attestation, which is like a letter to be authorize someone to pick up a package for you. And it would have taken me like half hour, 45 minutes to write a bad version and just kind of remember legal French well enough to do it. And, you know, 3 minutes with GPT, a little correction on my side, a little reorganization, and the person went and picked up the package for me. It was pretty cool.
Oh yeah. Less sophisticated example, I had it write a job description for the front desk staff of my condo. And it did an amazing job, and it saved me like 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So
do you guys know who Neil Katyal is? He's a Supreme Court lawyer. He posted this a couple of months ago on his Twitter account. He asked ChatGPT, this is where I really I was absolutely sold on the power of it. He asked ChatGPT to write a blog post, and I can't remember if it was on the state of SCOTUS or a particular judge. I can't remember what the subject matter was, but he asked it to write it in Neil Katyal's voice. He's published all over the internet. And the output scared the living crap out of him. He was like, not only is it substantively fantastic, it's a blog post, but it sounds like me. And granted, there was a lot of data out there for it to grab pretty quickly. But the fact that it was able to do that without any editing from him, to me, was like, this is where it could be. It's a long way from doing that consistently, right? But that's where I think something of this magnitude can get to.
No, that's fantastic. I think just to, and we're just about at time. One thing that popped out to me is that you guys gave some really kind of important threads on the kinds of questions one might ask when looking and kind of evaluating various kinds of technology. You spoke about figuring out, you know, trying to talk to the company about what they're training on, what they're training with. Akshay, you talked about whether it's an open or closed ecosystem. I think, Rob, you said trust but verify. And then Akshay, you talked about developing some kind of a test, you know, to test the AI against before you just kind of accept its answers. I think one of the things we need to do, all of us right now, is kind of develop those checklists of like, you know, what are the questions that we need to ask when we're evaluating products, and when the technology is transforming so quickly, you know, kind of probably sharing ourselves as we're experimenting with this technology is pretty important. A couple other notes just to kind of summarize some cool lessons learned. Akshay just taught us that GPT sounds a lot like Neil Katyal, so kudos. Rob has been taking AI rides since 2018. Talk about a pioneer. He's also feeling bipolar about LLMs, which I think we all kind of had. And Akshay kindly told us that we may have read about Coinbase in the news before. Once or twice, Akshay.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we are at time. I want to thank both of you so much for joining me tonight. As I mentioned at the beginning of this call, every time I talk to you guys, I feel like I learn so much, and it's always a great pleasure. Hopefully, all the listeners were able to learn a lot too. And not that these guys aren't busy, but I will throw out there they are very approachable. So if you do have questions, I'm sure they would be willing to speak with you about it, especially if it's about legal ops. That, Lauren.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys so much for a wonderful conversation, and we're getting so many thank yous in the chat, so I hope you are able to see those. And thank you all for joining us, and of course, thank you to Knowable for sponsoring this great conversation. This was recorded, so you will all receive a link to the recording within the next day or two, so be on the lookout for that. And just another quick reminder to please take the survey that will pop up on your screen afterwards. So with that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I hope you join us for our next webinar. Thank you again, everyone.